Hello everyone and welcome to Getting Started Using ACL in Your Next Audit. My name is Jim Kaplan. I'm founder of AuditNet, and with us today is my colleague and friend Rich Lanza, an ACL and audit software expert. This webinar represents a collaboration between AuditNet and AuditSoftware.net in delivering training series focusing on audit software. We're really glad you could join us today. Before we proceed to today's material, the next slide will show you a little bit of information about myself. I'm the founder of AuditNet with a background as a CAE, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can see what it is. Let me go ahead and have Rich Lanza introduce himself, tell you a little bit of his background, and then I'll cover the housekeeping items for today, and then we'll get right into the material. Rich?
Great. So yeah, for myself, Rich Lanza here. I have been using ACL for over 20 years, and hopefully, that'll come through today in some of the things I've done. I also written a book, 101 ACL applications, which hopefully a lot of you have and use, it's a good kind of starter to ACL scripting. And the course today, what I wanted to do, as part of my experience, is try to pull together a course where I'm getting the key elements so that you could just get started with ACL, get data loaded, get data requested, start doing sampling on it, etc. So hopefully, again, that'll come through, and I tried to pick out some of the better learning gems from it all, so that we could kind of focus your training today. And Jim, I'll head back to you about AuditNet and some of the other housekeeping.
Thanks. Well, there is a slide up there telling you a little bit about AuditNet, those of you that aren't familiar with it. But let me go ahead and cover the housekeeping items for today. I'm going to be moderating the webinar today, but basically the webinar and its material are the property of AuditNet and Cash Recovery Partners. Unauthorized usage or recording of the webinar or any of its material is strictly forbidden. We are recording the webinar, and you will be provided access to that recording within 5 to 7 business days after the webinar. In addition, we'll have an evaluation questionnaire that will show up at the end of today's webinar if you would just take a minute or two to complete the evaluation questions. Also, because this webinar qualifies for CPE, we will be putting up polling questions relating to the material covered in compliance with NASBA rules. The question period will remain open for about a minute, so it's important that you respond quickly. Those answering the questions will receive their CPE certificates by email within 7 to 10 business days. You must answer all of the polling questions in order to receive CPE. This is per NASBA guidelines, so please take your time, read the question, answer them. It's less important that you answer correctly. We'd like you to answer correctly, but just you need to answer the question just to show that you are paying attention and participating. We will also take your questions during the webinar. Submit your questions via the chat window at the lower right-hand box on your screen. Type your questions and press return to send it. Any question we're unable to answer by the end of the webinar, we'll answer directly within 48 hours. If you're having trouble with the GoToWebinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, log out and log back in again. If you can connect to the webinar and the audio portion but get kicked off at any time, just reconnect using the same steps you used at first. Thanks again for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Rich Lanza to cover ACL, getting started using ACL in your next audit. Rich?
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Jim. And as I said initially, I really tried to get a course that encapsulated everything that you would hopefully need to know to get started with ACL. And starting off, I just wanted to talk about the process of data analytics and how you should, at least for the first few, think about mapping your audit objectives to scripting and then running reports. Then we'll get quickly into requesting data, how to define all these different data file types. We will then utilize the analyze commands, which are a little bit easier. things like statistics and total and stratify are just kind of interesting to look at and not that hard to run. And then we'll start to get into more of the data type sequencing, which is more like the sorting and summarizing and duplicate and join. And we'll spend a fair amount of time on joins because they're quite complex. So we'll spend some time there. I didn't want to leave out sampling, so I have a decent amount, probably about a half hour, if not more, devoted to sampling. Because I know a lot of people still use ACL just for sampling, like just get the data in there and do a monetary unit sample or something. So we will talk about that as well. And I'm going to note it at the end, but what you're getting here today is this 3-hour CPE course, but you'll also get at the end of this course the 3 or so courses that were originally set up for this. So I have videos that we'll be using at times today, and basically you'll be getting double the amount in video format after the course. So, you know, we're going to have a 3-hour CPE today. We may not cover every topic. We're covering everything here, obviously, but every topic that you might want to learn within sampling. And for that, as an example, you know, we basically have the courses that we're giving you so that you could watch everything. So we're doing that with the data course, I believe, and the analyze course. And again, we'll go through it as we get there. But you will have a lot of extra learning tools after the course, and you'll have that for a year of time. So hopefully that will help you. And continuing on here, the quick process to running data. What I wanted to do is walk you through quickly the step process to getting going with your analytics, and then we'll basically walk through all these steps today. Not so much in the scripting part because that's another course, but at least getting you kind of started. Okay, with that said, what I wanted to do is just carry over a file or two for you to see. So hold on one second here. So, one of the things that we did in this publication a while back was we laid out 5 primary audit objectives of accounts payable. And I'm not going to get into the details right now. I just wanted to show you how you really should take those audit objectives and make audit questions or, control type questions, risk questions, but usually we focus on the controls like, our budget's maintained and other things, which might be more of an inquiry observation. But then you have other tests that are data related, such as, is invoicing kind of kept to a minimum from a process efficiency point of view. So those audit questions could require analysis. We then created the ACL batches, we called them at the time, now called scripting, and that was then encapsulated here. But I wanted to kind of show you that process. It worked well in that image, so I thought I'd show it to you. And I then, you can even get a little more detailed about it if you'd like, and you can lay out for every report that you're going to run the actual data fields that you need in order to run that analysis. For example, going through a few reports here like summarized by vendor, and I just need these 3 fields. Probably over here the vendor number is in there somewhere, but you kind of get the idea. At the end of this process, this top line really becomes like your data request in a lot of ways, because once you've validated you have all the data fields based on your reports, you now so anyway, getting a matrix like this when you're starting out and thinking about the data that you might want to get based on the reports that you want to run. So the reports are the key thing kind of to do first, or even what audit objectives you want is probably first. But with that said, and then moving from there. So let's kind of head back. Now what I wanted to do is kind of talk a bit about data requests, and if you don't mind holding on just one second, we'll get that going. So I wanted to move over to one of the data files that we will be providing you after this session, and everything we talk about today, pretty much, I believe. I'll let you know if there's anything that's not coming over, but everything we show you will be getting, and you can play with yourself. This is a data request, and I'm going to now switch over to Word so that we can take a look at that. So the data request then, based on which reports you picked, which objectives you want to meet, which data elements then do you need as the building blocks of the case that you're making, you then need to kind of present that over to management in a way that just makes it easy for them and helpful in just, I guess, even for our perspective, in documenting what you want. A lot of times, by getting to this point of knowing what data fields do I need from a particular data table can be, something that's, very helpful to just then be able to kind of automate that from there. So at the highest levels, I've given you an example of three different tables that you might want to get from accounts payable, and I did my best to put the data fields that I normally am asking for, and the header file. Header file is mainly, and I apologize, I wanted to kind of go through this and try to help you understand the different data tables that you might get, but then also into the data fields themselves as to why we're getting some of them for analysis. So the high level, invoice header is essentially every record is an invoice. So that's stated there. Invoice distribution, we then get the general ledger distribution of that one record. So, one record up here becomes 5 records down here. So as we distribute, part of the bill to a cost of goods sold and part of the bill to SG&A, et cetera. So that's kind of the invoice distribution. Then there's the vendor master file, and I didn't put the employee master file, did I? But then we have the vendor master file. A lot of times we ask for the employee master file as well. It's pretty much the same thing as the vendor master file, except a couple of items over here get dropped. So now drilling in a little bit further, I wanted to talk through why we get certain fields and ask certain questions. And one of them being the first thing I can jump to is getting the internal transaction number, knowing that that is like the unique number for a table, and it just helps you. I have to say, I'll just kind of put it in red here just for our purposes right now, but Microsoft Access does a funny thing in that it will add a record number to any data table that doesn't have a record number. It at least tells you, it warns you, you better do this. And it's for good reason, even though you don't have to ask for a record number from the company. I mean, I guess it's not a bad idea. But normally you can just quickly calculate this in ACL, and you can show you how to do that later. But I do like to put that in there and note that that unique number, knowing that that's the record, but also from a client's perspective, what they think is unique in that data table is also helpful. Because a lot of times I get an invoice distribution file, the internal transaction number is repeated many times, there's postings throughout the general ledger, but yet in, the invoice, I apologize, I get an invoice header file that looks like an invoice distribution file. So the invoice header file has multiple internal transaction numbers. It has, multiple general ledger accounts, descriptions, etc. And it really doesn't fit to this record type. So by knowing what the client thinks is unique can help you in understanding whether or not you got the right file. And this is this kind of goes throughout throughout the 3 different tables that we'll talk through here. Other data fields that you want to get are fields that help you understand what type of transaction it is and where it might be posted, or who it might relate to. So vendor number, invoice date are useful. I think in the invoice date category, you really should think about the time frame that you're looking for. I wouldn't ask for 12 years of data because the system has it. If it's easier for them to pull the data table that way for you, sometimes it is easier for them just to do a copy of the file and give it to you. So, in that fashion, okay. But normally, I think it's a lot easier for them to give you 2 years worth of data or 3 years worth of data. And therefore, think about that from an invoice date perspective, a check date, an enter date. We ask for a fair number of dates. I'd also say, to think about, I guess, I'm thinking about invoice transactions, what are related tables, and, sometimes the check information comes as a related table, doesn't come with the invoice header table, but it is related and does help you understand, how that invoice transaction's been processed and finished off. In order to sort of avoid dates or cancel dates. I've seen many times where we've run analysis and determined that there were many dummy type transactions or false transactions in the data, and just knowing where those cancel flags are, I like to throw the voided cancel flag date in there or flag every time just for that purpose. We've asked some questions here as well, trying to move through this efficiently here. But, we basically said some of the things that I've talked about a second ago. As we look at the invoice distribution table, we would not only have the internal transaction number, but this is normally within the invoice distribution table. You may want to have a line number that's being processed against. So in this case, you don't exactly need it, but it is something that it does help you get down to that unique value in that transaction. From the vendor master file point of view, we like to get address, and I mean, getting things like tax identification number and other information, I mean, it can be a little concerning, so you have to take that with, some caution. But I do think getting type fields for vendors is very interesting if they're completed. A lot of times these types of fields are not completed, but rather, just something that is in the system and no one ever filled it out, so it just didn't go anywhere. As to the data delivery and type, I like to even explain to people what I'd like to get. And, I have to say Access is usually the second to flat, but even Excel now has become so popular with its million records that it's something that isn't that much of an issue. And ACL 9.2 better supports that. I will not be using ACL 9.2 today. It is on another computer, but at the same time, the newer versions do kind of allow you to import Excel spreadsheets more directly or export to it as well. Delimited files are kind of next on the list. Sometimes I like to play with them in Excel, but delimited files can also, is a good alternative. This would be a text type file, and if I have one open, it would look something like this, but actually would be a little bit cleaner. And if I can get this one open here, it would look more like this. And this is delimited, where you have, you can kind of barely see it, but these little arrow marks there are tabs, and that's actually the tab character in this program. And it's kind of interesting too, as you can actually, in these text editors, we'll talk about this later, but you can actually try to find a tab, which I've done here. So it's kind of a useful tool sometimes if you're trying to find things. Okay. So printer spool files, actually I did just show you that. That looks like something like this. And I don't particularly like these. I mean, if it's something that you can get, sure enough, but generally speaking, I'd rather you not use that data. It's useful a lot of times to ask for the data structure. I mean, if you are getting a fixed length file, there will be a fixed length, 7, 30, 20, whatever it be. So it's useful to get. For data verification, we've asked for a few things here like record count and total invoice amount value, and whether or not we can get a sample copy of an invoice, maybe for hard copy nature, kind of bringing into play everything that I talked about in the data import mistakes, at least the first like 3 or 4 of them. So that's sort of helpful, I think, just to kind of put that up front. A lot of times these questions get forgotten until the end, and then people don't have time to focus on them at that point. One of the things that I like to do whenever we get a data file is also to validate that data file. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, and we will actually later show you how to create a small data script that you might be able to use for automating validation. And I try to automate all of this stuff as much as I can so that you don't have to spend a lot of time doing it yourself. So in looking at the different validation techniques that you might want to consider, I like to ask a bunch of questions. Do we have it all, the data fields, the supplier records, the invoice records? Is there one invoice record per the invoice file, going back to that unique nature? I would also say on the vendor file with the one supplier record, one thing that happens a lot in the data tables between the supplier and invoice records is that there's a site code, and the site code, it's very common in Oracle, would be used to denote different sites for the same company. So a very large company might have 20 different sites that are being paid to, and you need to kind of get the site code version of the supplier number in order for it to be unique in that table. So and it's more accurate, of where the actual payment was sent. So it's something to think about with supplier records as well, that it needs to be a unique number, the supplier record. And a lot of times you need to kind of consider if there's a site code associated with it as well. So we've talked about some of these in the slides. Do the values and volumes make sense? One thing that you might want to check is in matching things like the supplier file to the invoice file. Is it a pretty comparable listing? Do we have enough information matching between the two? If you had a check file, you'd be asking the same questions. Did we get enough payment? And we have that down below there. Do we have the associated payment information? So that's joining in as well. Understanding transaction types, again, going to summarizing on transaction types. I like to look at what are those different types and make sure that we've gotten all of them for processing purposes. And some other things is, sometimes when you bring in data from Excel, you'll get scientific notation in a lot of the text fields, like invoice number. It's kind of odd that would happen, but it does happen from time to time, and there are ways to kind of fix for that. Probably should note it here because it won't come up later, is to quickly fix for that. Usually in Excel, you can set up a left function where you're taking out, say, the left 20 characters of that particular field. Might even want to do 15. And then the next 20, and then the following 20. And you can use a left function followed by 2 mid functions if you know how to use those. And that would, is probably the best way of getting rid of that issue if you've ever noticed that issue. It is common. Okay, so we've listed a polling question up there. So what comes first in the data extraction process? Request data, set objectives, set report objectives, validate data. So if you don't mind going through that. And in the interim, as people have questions, if you could post them out, I keep kind of looking randomly up here to check if people are posting questions. but trying to answer them all as we go through the day. And these are good times too as we do the polling questions. If you want to ask questions now, these are good times as well. But wanted to again kind of give you the initial part of getting data, which is the data request part, which is what we talked about, setting your audit objectives, getting data, etc. Now doing the reporting side of it will come probably in about another half hour or so. So what I wanted to spend in about the next half hour or so is actually importing data. And a lot of people feel that the getting data into ACL is the hardest part. So that's kind of where we're going to head now. I'm going to give you very specific instructions on how to bring in all these different data types, so you could always kind of go back and look up the data type that you get, comma separated file. We could then go through in basically the training. We'll go through it today, but you will be getting a video after the class to answer some of the questions that are coming in. So you will have these videos for the future. So just looking at the poll here, everyone's voted, so I'm just going to close that out, and I'll share that with everyone. And for the most part, everyone is pretty much right on the money here. I'm just trying to read it myself. 86% getting the setting audit objectives, and a few people with the report objectives, which is really close. You tend not to want to just run out and get data, so that's one thing that you don't want to do before kind of thinking about the reporting that you want to run. With all that noted, one question came in: what is the best file to receive? What file type? What is a flat file? It's more otherwise known as like a fixed length file, and just kind of actually, bear with me 1 second here. We can kind of hide the poll. But the fixed length file or flat file is one where everything kind of has a fixed length in ACL. So let me hide the poll so everyone can kind of see my screen, and you'll see an ACL screen. And you'll kind of notice here the PO number is the first 5 characters in that data. It starts at the 1 or so, goes to 5, and it's named PO number. It's fixed. It's always fixed. There's no delimiters that kind of set up what the columns are or anything else like that. So, going to kind of that point of looking at ACL, I figured kind of as a good next step in our process is actually to now talk about importing data files. And, what we will actually talk about in I will kind of repeat myself in just a few minutes in this training segment that you're going to see. Where we talk about importing the data files and the different data types in particular, and then I walk through the definition of each one. So that'll be kind of the 2 things that we're doing next. So as I don't see any other questions, and just to kind of keep things moving here, let me get started with this, and we'll go from there. Hold on 1 second. I wanted to now start moving over to ACL a bit, and one of the things we will kind of go through various sets of these data files. We will take a question first, a polling question in the next few minutes, but then we'll kind of move into just going through each of the data files and fields, as I did want to walk you through that. And then we're going to follow that by talking through the various functions that you would use in ACL for processing. So, just kind of walking through these next few slides, the data import in ACL has a variety of imports. The ones that I'm going to talk about today are really just of the disk nature, the ones that are on your hard drive. There are others that are things like ODBC, and the problem with that ODBC, the open nature of that, a lot of times departments will not allow that to take place. And with that said, though, other products out there that are quite useful, especially in ACL, is SAP's Direct Link, which we won't be talking about today, but it's something where it does allow you to directly link and get data from SAP, but again, it's outside of the scope of what we'll talk about today. of the different file types, the fixed length file type is one of the best for ACL, not only because ACL tends to turn everything into a fixed length file anyway. I mean, it by its nature, it likes to do that, and that's one reason. But another reason is that it leads to consistency down the road. So a year from now, when you get the data file again, if it is fixed length, you can just, again, kind of bolt it in and run it again. And hence a good reason. Last reason is a lot of times the fixed length files are raw data files that are coming off the system and are more, let's say pure of data. Tabbed delimited files allow you are basically delimited by either a tab or a comma or a pipe, and what you're going to then do is kind of break that up, and ACL is going to convert that tab file into a fixed length file. Excel files, I actually don't generally take Excel files and go right into ACL with them. What I do is I do save them to a tab delimited file and then bring it in that way. I do find it usually goes a little bit quicker, and I find that the data wizard of ACL tends to overthink Excel a little too much at times, and I find the pure nature of the tab delimit, the ASCII tab delimit, is much better. So I just rather get a tab delimited file, I guess, or convert over to that. And I should say that that is even true for Access. That should be on that slide, Excel and Access. I will convert over to tab delimited files, generally speaking. We'll take a look at report files as well, which are that one that we showed a few minutes ago. It had headers and footers and such. And I won't be showing the PDF file today, but in basic terms, the PDF file works the same way as the report file. And I have to say, I think it's even worse a lot of times, just from a data quality point of view, that a PDF is I believe, an image. And because it's an image, you're not ever really sure whether or not the data is going to be as pure or laid out the way you want it to be. So just going through a couple of other slides from a data definition point of view, kind of getting the high levels, and then we'll dive in and just start defining files. I find this is helpful for a lot of people, especially starting out in ACL, that a lot of people tend to define dates as ASCII fields and tend to define numerics or numbers as ASCII fields, and vice versa. They'll take an ASCII field like check number, something that really should be a character-based number, and therefore more like text or ASCII. These are all the synonyms for ASCII. So check number a lot of times will be defined as a numeric, and you need to kind of convert that back over. And I'm actually going to show a trick on how to fix for that. Basically, you can kind of trick for that using Excel, or I believe you could try to use your text editor as well. But Excel works a little bit easier; it's a little cleaner. And let's kind of go through the chart though. The first question you should ask is the field a date? And something that, month, day, year, something like that. And if so, yes, define it as a date format. We will show you that. Next is, do you add or subtract the field ever? Would you? I guess ever. You might do it for a check number to look for gaps or something, but it's something you almost never, ever do. You're using the check number really to give you information about that payment, and it's more of a text information field. If you do, so everything generally is defined as character. There are a few numbers and there are a few dates, but a lot of times most of the things are characters. If it is a numeric, a good kind of trick is to determine whether or not it is something that you should define as a numeric format or print format. And I'm going to show you an ACL where ACL print format, which is otherwise known as formatted, in ACL. So we'll show you what that is. There's differences in the language. So I want you to understand that. So print is formatted, and then numeric is unformatted number. And you'll see that as we define that. The numeric, what you're trying to do is impute decimal places into the number, whereas the print format, the decimal places are generally there. They may not always be there, but they're generally there. So again, we'll show you some examples of this, but I wanted to give you the high level. And hopefully this chart, which if you don't have the slides, you will be getting slides and files. This chart hopefully helps you as well when you're going through and doing your definition process. ACL's data definition wizard, some people use it, some people don't. I do use it quite a bit and get it to a point, and then I kind of, sometimes do bypass some of what ACL is asking for in the wizard, but I use about 80% of it. I find that it sometimes isn't always right. It makes guesses about the data, and those guesses aren't always right. But it can be easily fixed, so it's not something that you usually have to spend a lot of time on. I think that you want to consider making sure that you set up your fields with obviously reasonable lengths, and as best as you can. We'll talk about that, and that really means we'll talk about that. It's basically keeping your file sizes smaller, so that you don't have fields that are 300 characters big. Unless you really need it, you don't usually need that many characters, and it just leads to a much larger data file. So by defining it, reasonable length, it helps. You might want to define overlapping fields, and we'll talk about how you might have a supplier number, and also have a part of that supplier number tell you what company it's from, and this would be a way to kind of do an overlapping field. And we have to talk about dates, because ACL has a way of defining dates and formatting dates, but sometimes people don't realize how it's to be formatted, and it can get confusing, and definitely something that we want to walk through as well. Going into ACL, this is, even though this is a simple ACL tip, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but I just have to note it, I find it really interesting that a lot of people will sometimes go to ACL and try to open up their data file, and they'll say, well, the project files are, that's not right, and then they'll kind of go over to their computer. Bear with me as I scroll about here, and sorry, this will go quicker in the future. And they'll try to open up like a paid file as an ACL file and try to open that up. And it's not a project file. This is your data file. I almost don't even want to do it, but I'll do it for that one, so sorry about the noise there. It basically says it's not about, it's not an ACL project. What you need to do is create a new project folder, and this is essentially a ACL project file. We're going to call this data import. And initially, we get this welcome screen wizard. If you've used ACL, you may close the wizard. I usually just have it pop up. And then we go to the next. We are, again, going locally here. We're not going to ACL server. We're not doing any sort of SAP link, etc. We're not doing the ODBC or external definition right now for purposes of our discussion today. We're really just focusing on the dist one. External definition allows you to define a table by bringing in its definition and then applying that definition to the data. It's something where if you have an AS400 or if you have a COBOL data file mainframe, COBOL mainframe, if you have two of those applications, then external definition is usually a good thing to go after. But for 95% of the population, I think most people are working off of the disk at this point, and they're getting a data file like a text file or Excel file that they're then importing. There are a variety of files that we could define here today. What I wanted to initially bring in was this paid file txt and show you bringing in a delimited text file. And by bringing in this, oh, and I'm going through this too quickly. It's basically, there's two different types. There's EBCDIC and there's ASCII. IBM mainframe would be EBCDIC. Usually ACL can pick up on EBCDIC very quickly and tell you what to do. And you know, for the most part, that text file is an ASCII text file, PC text file. Okay, and we're basically working off of a delimited text file. It is delimited, I believe, by tabs, and we looked at that earlier in this editor, and what's kind of creepy is I actually have it open in my editor, so let me close that. I believe it defines it. As far as I've ever used ACL, it will allow you to kind of have it open in that other application, but it is a little creepy. I think you're going to break something. So with that delimited text file, we'll move to the next step. ACL is pretty good at picking it. You might get data that looks like this. I would try other options such as tab. You know, if this says none, you might want to put double quote as an example. You know, try some other options. Your data may also come through and not have the header record listed at the top. And one thing that you can do is just reset the option up at top there, use first row as field names, and guess. And again, there are various fields, sorry, the definition is brought in because it's tab delimited. It does a pretty good job of kind of parsing where the columns are. You might want to take a look at it over to the right, just to make sure that things, you know, look copacetic. And, you know, sometimes I'm trying to, I don't know if I can recreate what, you know, what it would look like if it was bad data right now, but it might be something where the data is shifting to the left and right. There might be, you know, one field over here with like one item in it or something like that, and because the data record shifted over. But for the most part, you know, I think it's good just to kind of scroll over, and I think you're going to find that 9 out of 10 times it will import the data properly. Now, it tells you you have this error, and you know, an error sounds like such a terrible thing, and it's, I think, more of a small issue or, you know, a concern that you might want to just look into. But I don't know if error is kind of a tough word, but really what it's doing is it's parsing data, and when it's going through the data, if it finds things like blank dates, or it might find that a certain field is not large enough and it needs to pad that field a little bit more than normal, it will come in and say there's an error, but for the most part the errors are quite normal. So continuing is preferred. And ACL at this point, because the tab delimited file, you know, again, as we were looking at it a second ago, I'll open it up. I'll open up this copy version. The tab delimited file is variable length. You can notice how certain fields are a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, you know, and I think you'll find as you go to the right even more, you know, things kind of spread out quite a bit. So it's variable length. And it's based as long as each data point, all the data fields, plus each tab. So, you know, you kind of add up all the data field longest records and all the tabs, and you would end up getting the record length of that file. And ACL is going to do that. It's basically going to create this FIL file. So we're going to call this paid file. You know, now fixed. And what there was is, again, in this case, a lot of these were blank dates, and it basically padded that, but nothing to be that concerned about. So we'll move on to the next part of this, which is to define the data fields themselves. As I said, there was, maybe I'll even go back to these slides here just for a second. Kind of a good point to just jump back to the slide. this is kind of where we start asking the question, is it a date? Is it something we're going to add and subtract? If not, define it as a character. And then we'll walk through all the permutations of that. So check number, as we talked about a little bit, is not a numeric. It's an ASCII field, and it's because you would never add and subtract check number. We'll do a few of these. I don't want to waste everyone's time, but the check amount would be numeric because it is something we want to add up or subtract or multiply or divide. But we wanted to take a look now, are there decimal places or not in the data, and understand whether or not we need to adjust for that. And in this case, there are decimal places, so numeric formatted, which is also known as print, would be the format. Same as discount, and now enter date. Let's kind of change that, date format. Now, what's interesting is you need to follow the date format as listed within the data file. So enter date has month, day, year. You can kind of see the day here. So we'll type that in. And what you can't do is do things like, put in month, day, year, because that's how you want to view the date. What you're doing here, and similarly, you can't do this, where you're denoting denoting a different type of character set. You have to kind of follow exactly the way the data is listed within ACL as you see it. So in this case, it is month, day, year. So just continuing on through the data table, once again, strangely enough, even invoice number gets defined as a numeric. We may want to change that to ASCII and continue through. But most of these, like payment terms, we would also want to make that an ASCII because we're not going to add up payment terms per se, I guess, and PO number would be another thing that it can help you to understand why certain invoices were paid on, as an example, hence a good file to get, or a good field to get, sorry. Okay, so continuing through this, I did not define every field perfectly here, really just as a matter of test and moving on through the course, but wanted to show you ASCII, numeric, date fields, and we will talk about improving this format using various filters and functions, as well as something that we can do in Excel. So it gives you a bit of a summary. You can go back at this point if you do want to change something. Can go back, and but it is good to kind of check this, and a lot of times say invoice batch, that really shouldn't be a numeric. Instead, the invoice batch should basically be an ASCII field. So that'd be something where you could go back, make that change, and now invoice batch is ASCII. So again, we'll finish off this file. ACL has now padded those fields and created this new file that is fixed length. And as you go into the edit table layout of this file, you'll notice that the lengths now are fixed in nature, 12, 10, 12, etc. Best to get the data file that way. Glad to see that everyone's getting it that way, and that's quite good. Now, I wanted to quickly go back and say, if you did get delimited files, very common for a majority of systems out there, let's kind of open up this tab delimited file in Excel just to quickly show you. So pay file is already open. And what we're going to do is, now that this file is set up, one of the things that you can do is, in the data section, is decide what fields you want to set as ASCII or text, and which ones you want to set as numeric and date. And the date I can't help you with exactly. We have to define this text. But if you put let's say a large T as an example, whoops, bear with me 1 minute. Scroll lock is on. At T, and then the numerics, you want to put, say, a 0. Let me just kind of highlight this so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so where we have the T for text, 0 for the amount field, and moving on, where dates I have to put in as text, etc. And I'll even go so far as to just make everything else text, just to be simplistic. And, some companies, this isn't a bad idea to kind of start everything out as text, and then later, using what we're going to talk about, functions, you can then define the text fields into something that is now converted, such as a value or date. Okay, now that I have this file where I've put in this, basically this data indicator. The data indicator is the line, row number 2. I'm going to save this file, and I could bring it into ACL directly, but again, I'm going to save as, just following my normal procedure, tab delimited, and we're going to call this paid file and formatted. Because we've identified which, as best as we could, the formats for the data. So now I have this tab delimited text file that I'm saving, and the paid file formatted may contain issues for Excel, etc. Do you want to continue? You would say yes at that point. And bear with me 1 minute here. And then by closing Excel, you could save changes. I'm not going to save changes at this point. And going into ACL now. To open a new file, by the way, you can go File, New, Table, and you can also go or right-click on the data import folder, or whatever ACL document folder. Really, I believe it could be any folder within ACL. But by going File, New, or Data Import, New Table in this case, we're now going to bring in that Excel file. And it was called Paid File Formatted. Real quickly here, because I know you've been through this before, notice how I have that first record now in there, almost like a little bit of data. Error's been detected on number 2. I kind of know why, and I'll just paid, and we'll call it paid file format. Again, just interest of time, just moving through this one quickly, and again, just letting the program kind of take over. What's nice is ACL not only has defined the fields as text, but has also left justified all those fields for you. So notice that. The numeric fields, because we started out with the 0, does take the numeric formatted. I might even put a 0.00. I was being quick there, but 0.00 also helps, and in defining it and making sure everything goes well. Again, this text dates, I don't know how to turn a date automatically, so I have to call it a text and then save it as a date format. And I think everyone pretty much understands from this point, looking at this, how to continue from here. So I'm just going to cancel out. But what this does, again, is it will automatically define your ASCII and numeric fields, and then you just have to worry about date. I've also seen people, though, define all of their tables with the text or T at the top of all of them. And really any character would work. I just use T for text. And then within ACL, they're going to use functions to kind of save them or to change the format of those items. Okay. So, other formats that we wanted to show you today to really include them, but again, 80% of people are using fixed length files, so I don't want to completely belabor some of this. But what's kind of nice is I've showed you Excel, how to save to tab delimited, and any delimited file will work the same way. And what I wanted to now show you is the fixed length, but actually show it to you from the point of view of the report file. So we're kind of putting two things together in showing you some techniques. But essence, you'll see we are going to create a fixed file that we're going to utilize. The report file, this is sample data files. And I apologize, just going quickly through this. You would want to select the PC. Now, what's interesting is ACL determines that this is a print image report file, and hence something to define as kind of different than the normal text file. And what we're then doing is hitting next. Now, ACL does a great job, in finding where those detailed records are. Report files look like this a lot, and I like this particular report file because it has a couple of different, nuances to it. As you go through the data, you notice that there's a header record and other header information. This information appears kind of useless. I mean, maybe the date and time might be useful, but I don't know what else would be. And further down, things like the product class might be useful, but as you go down, there's also things like class totals that are not being picked up as well. And I suspect, I know how ACL is doing that, but we'll kind of walk through this example. And then again, the totals down below as well. I'm actually going to start over. So I'm going to delete this record and say, let's imagine that your import process didn't go so well. They never go so well, right? So we have to kind of plan for that and then define this data file from scratch. What you're trying to do initially is identify situations where you can look at a line of data and find something unique about it. One unique thing on this line of data would be the period or decimal place that happens throughout the unit cost field as well as the total cost field. I like the unit cost field because the unit cost field does not appear in the class total. That only the total cost shows up there. So I'm betting, when ACL Auto did this, that it figured out that that's the field that you need to go look at. So as you go down and kind of check the file, that's what you notice. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight one of those data points, and I'm going to highlight a data field. I believe it was invoice amount or unit cost. So we'll type in unit cost. Now, this is the interesting part. It's now going to ask me select some text that is always located in or near that field. It's used to identify occurrences in the field. And you want to highlight very carefully that amount. So it's setting that detailed record now starts wherever there's always a period, at that in that column there. So I think it's at item 59 in the data. If there's a decimal place, that's a detailed record. And real quickly here, I don't even know. I think this might be order number or something, or inventory number. But we're just quickly kind of noting a few of those fields. You can define every one of them by now highlighting it, and just kind of, we'll call this a product, I think it's product sales, but product description. And what I would then want to just show you, now that we have a few detail lines done, is the header lines. So notice here we have product class happening. Actually, I'm just canceling that. We have product class happening, the words product class, and they only happen in certain cases whenever there's some detail below it. A lot of times customer information is up here, name, address, city, state, zip, that kind of thing. And what you can do is highlight, did it again. You can highlight 01 and go out as far as you want, maybe 20 or 30 or so. And you do want to define this as a new record. It does not relate to detail. Well, it does relate to detailed, as we'll show you, but it's not the same thing as a detail. So you go, okay. And in this field 1, we're going to call this product class. Once again, it's asking, select some text that's always located in or near that field, and we'll select product class and hit OK. And what that's now done is created a header record that's going to be written next to the report record or detailed records each time. All right, last but not least, I noted up here that you have that slash mark there. I think that slash mark for the date only occurs in that one instance, and over again, but that's where it occurs. So I technically could highlight this data field and say new record and call this date of run and of the report and highlight the one slash mark there and say OK. And I'm pretty sure that that would be then a header 2. There's also ways of setting up footer records. We talked about header records. There's footer records. But for right now, let's carry on. I wanted to kind of show you a lot of the report functionality, mainly because as much as I'm not a big believer in them, I also feel that they have their place in that a lot of companies, it's really the best and only way to get data out of the system. So it's something where it's kind of understood. So we'll hit the next button, and we'll call this report. We could call it report.fil. Again, ACL is creating a fixed length file now of this report file. Everything should be defined pretty well, as you've seen. Now, what's interesting is that product class field has now been written down to each detailed record, so it's been related as like a table. It's been related, as well as the date of the run. So you even know like when the data file is run. I'm going to continue on and just say yes and answer all its questions, but yes, agree that everything there imported properly. What I also kind of showed you there as we were going through that report file, and let me just open that report file up in a text editor because it's just easier to look at here. We're really defining a fixed length file. We're really sitting here saying that, the data here is fixed in nature. It's going to start at A, let's say this, I think it was product description or something, and it's going to end around here, and IT departments should be able to tell you that. And even with the reports, a lot of times you can get for the report, what was the size of that data field? Was it 30 characters, 20 characters? And that can be helpful. And then obviously the quantity and unit cost, etc. But it is fixed every time. As you look down, everything is kind of in lined up order. And again, we didn't walk through the fixed length file. I know a lot of people have them. But what's nice is they actually go right into ACL rather quickly. Now just going back, now that we've imported a couple of tables, we can double-click, just move this, bear with me one second here. So what we can do is move between the tables by double-clicking on each one. But what's now useful for us, and we'll kind of move on to this paid file table, it's useful, I believe, to take a look at the entire file. Obviously, just kind of look, maybe scroll down and take a look at things and make sure why are things not looking right, and anything kind of shifting in the data where the address now is showing up over here. These are all causes for some concern. But I do find that the edit table layout, so edit table layout, is a very useful box or area to work within. By selecting the options up here, you can sort name or start in this case. I like to look at things from more of a start point of view. It's just, usually, I don't know in this case per se, but usually when you import data, it is laid out pretty logically. It's vendor number and invoice number, etc. Again, can't quote that for this, but that is usually the way it goes. And also, as we define some fields, you're going to see that these new calculated fields that we're creating, or as ACL calls expressions, and that's over here, this blue button here. It's a little hard sometimes to see them, but this would be the add a new expression. This will actually, anything that we create here, would go to the end of the list, and actually the start is 0, because that calculated field is more in the brain of ACL. It's not actually in the data files. Okay, so we switched over to our polling question. And what is the best and easiest to import to ACL? Fixed length, tab, Excel, Access, or other? And now is a good time to ask any questions if folks have questions, and try to answer everything on the board that was put up there in the class, but also in a message back to folks. Also looks like most of you have voted, so thank you for attending. And
Rich?
yeah.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile to, if some of the questions might pertain to the whole audience. I don't know if you responded individually or to the whole audience.
Yeah, responded to everybody, and and actually we've answered everything so far. Okay. Actually in the course.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks. And so almost everyone's voted. I'll leave the polling out there and the question out there for just a minute more. I wanted to spend a good hour on the importing process because people do spend a lot of time in that process and struggle there. Then, as we said, we're going to jump into the analyze commands, and I'm going to give kind of a quick intro to many of the commands with a kind of a simple data file that you'll see. And with that, after that, we'll then do more advanced kind of analyze functions. With all that said, I'm just trying to see what else. Yep, it's a lot of cross-tabbing and stratifying and and such. And then we'll jump into duplicates a little bit later on. So that's kind of like the second hour is going through pretty much all of the analyze commands, duplicates, and starting to kind of get through the data menu a little bit itself. So that's the next hour. But with that said, I think we've gotten through all the questions. I'm going to close out the poll. Share that. Yep, almost everybody's right on that. Fixed length is the correct answer. And without further ado, I will start showing my screen again. Bear with me 1 minute, just getting all organized. Okay, great. So, next step here, what I wanted to do is I have a data file here, real simple. It's basically debits, credits, journal entry or general ledger account number, and then the journal entry number itself. So we have those 4 fields, and what I wanted to do first off is show you the analyze menu, and essentially there's the count, the total, statistics, stratify, classify, and we'll go through a lot of these quickly here. And then we'll spend a little bit more time today going more through stratify, as said, summarize and cross-tab, as well as get into gaps and duplicates down here below. I wasn't going to get into the fuzzy stuff because it's more advanced, but we're pretty much covering everything in here. And like I said, the videos that we get, or you'll get afterwards, have more time spent on all of the topics. So just noting that, trying to give you the key elements here. But first off, count records. You might want to say count if the debit amount, you don't have to do an if statement, but count if the debit amount is greater than $1,000, and you can hit OK, and it'll tell you 27,813 out of. You could look down below in the left-hand corner here and see the 110,836. So what is that? Maybe 25% of the file have debit amounts greater than 10,000 or 1,000. The next one is total. Kind of follows the same sequence. I'm just going to total these 2 fields just to kind of show you how that works. What's good is they balance, and again about 3.4 billion in that case. Back to here, then using statistics, which I use a lot more. Profile gives you some of the statistics, but not all of them. So you might want to just use statistics. I may as well just do it on these 2. I'm going to hit standard deviation because that's kind of useful, and we'll hit OK. And I do this a lot just to look at, are there any negative values in the field? Are there positive values? This even gives you the standard deviation, which you could take the average plus, say, one standard deviation, and therefore, onward and onward. Another thing to note here is we get the highest and lowest items, which you can change. I just want to show you kind of quickly, if you want to analyze stuff, you can click on that command. It brings it up into the command line. Then I hit open up the dialog box, and in this case, you can change how many items to pull out. You could say top 10. So I want to see the top 10 items versus top, and there might be a limit there, but again, it gives you an idea of what those are. Okay, if you then want to click on any of these items, anything that has a hyperlink on it will allow you to kind of drill down. So items less than 0 was blank because everything was greater than 0 and such. So getting quickly through this, we'll spend a little bit more on the stratify command, but I may as well throw this in here. What's nice is whenever you do a statistic first, the stratify minimum and maximum appear. And that way you don't have to calculate it. We'll just, maybe stratify on the credit amount, accumulate the credit amount, and we'll just go 0. Okay, just use like a logarithmic kind of approach. And just getting an idea of where things fall, and as always, a lot of things fall in the lower strata where 74% of the count makes up only just 0.01% of the value. Greater than 100,000 is quite good and has most of the value. So you could kind of see that in strata. If you want to see what those are, you can again click on that. It'll bring you only to those items that are greater than $100,000. And I like the logarithmic stratification, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, million, that kind of thing. Keep multiplying by 10, basically. Okay. Other things to consider would be, say, the classify command. The classify command is something of basically the summarize command. And I think it's going to bark at me if I do this. I almost don't want to do this, where maybe what I could do, though, is say credit amounts greater than 100,000. I can classify now. It may not be that important or interesting. Okay, so even that is going to be greater than 1,000 rows. So I saw it was going to bark at me. And in this case, we have more than 1,000 journal entries that unfortunately have items greater than, I think it was $100,000 in it. So there's a lot there to show. But if you are kind of classifying on something of more of like an invoice type, or something of that nature, a payment type, and there's only like 10 of them, what's nice is the classify will kind of give you a quick summary. You can actually change and accumulate amounts in this, so you could accumulate like the debit and credit amount. So it is kind of a useful tool for quick analysis. Then the summarize command, which we'll spend more time on, this is where you can not only kind of summarize, say, on the journal entry number and accumulate the debits and credits, and we'll output this to a file called JESUM. Keep it. I'm just trying to do some really simple, basic groundwork for people that haven't seen this before, and in this case, the summary of these items, I think it was the items only over 100,000 though in credits, will show up summarized by journal entry number. If you want to sort this then in descending order to see which one had the most, you can just right-click on a column, sort in descending order, and that summarize command becomes quite helpful. So you can then right-click on this too and quick filter to equal only that, for if there was some reason to do that. So wanted to give you an idea of how the summarize command works, how you can kind of right-click on a lot of columns and values to do more filtering if needed. And okay, so that's that one. Last but not least, we will spend time on the cross-tabulate function in a few minutes, so you'll see like more examples of this. But this is basically like a static pivot table. So if you've ever seen a pivot table before, this is what I feel the crosstab provides. And let me just try to bring over, oh, here it is. So in this file, we have, I'm just trying to think here, I think we have terms. So we have like a vendor terms field. Now that, of course, is probably going to be a numeric field and play havoc with me. Okay, let's see if we could quickly get a better file. So going into the paid invoice file, we could classify in this case by the enterer's initials, and just wanted to show you how the classify works kind of nicely when there's like a tighter pack of items there. And another thing that you might want to do though is use this crosstab function. I'm just trying to get you a decent example here of where we might be able to use this. So one kind of interesting way, let's see if we can pull this off quickly, is in the enter date, I do have kind of a year field here, and I could just quickly type in entered year. Sorry about that. Okay. And now that I have that, I can cross-tab this vendor table on vendor name, let's just say, and we'll go on the entered year, and we'll accumulate the invoice amount. I guess I'll include the count just to show you what that looks like, and we'll call this cross vendor. And what that did was give you not only the amount and count, just like a pivot table would, for 1995 and 1996 by these various vendors over on the left-hand side. So that's kind of the simple crosstab, and again, wanted to give you a lot of that before we went into a more complex sequence, but before we do that, I thought this might be a good time to take a bit of a break. We are, kind of coming up, maybe not halfway through yet, but getting there. So, maybe this would be a good time just to take a 5-minute break. I have 12:17, and if we said we'd start back up maybe around 12:22 or so, that would be great. In the meantime, if people want to ask questions, that would be a great time to do this, and we'll just kind of if people want to just walk away from the computer a bit, we will be here till about the 2 o'clock hour Eastern time. Again, just taking a 5-minute break. We'll be starting up in about 3 minutes. And feel free to ask questions in the meantime. We're here to answer them as needed. Okay, so we were going to get started again, just a 5-minute break point. I didn't see any questions come in, or I'd answer away. One key note I wanted to make here in kind of the quickly going through some of the more, the commands more quickly in the beginning before we get into the detailed stuff. I wanted to show you how the vendor name needs to be sorted on in order for like a summarize to work properly. I mean, otherwise you could have an Air Freight Corp here and an Air Freight Corp there. You kind of have to summarize or sort the data first. Sort the data into its components. So you have Air Freight, all lined up, and then you would summarize on that item. Utilizing the summarize or command is great. However, just make sure that pre-sort option is selected. Same thing true for the crosstab. So with that said, without further ado, I'm just going to kind of jump into this next segment where we're going to talk about stratifying a break and utilizing the break function with Stratify. We will now discuss the basic function of the Stratify command, as well as the Stratify command using a break. For things, in our case, we'll do it on the enterer of the invoice. So we're going to break the stratification and do a separate stratification for each enterer of invoices. But you could do it on almost anything, department, even vendor, but you got to be a little careful. And this is where if you create a break file where you create all these stratifications, you should do it to a table. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, let's just do the stratify and stratify using a break, which is a good first step. In completing a stratify command, the first thing I would ever do is run a statistics on the field that I plan on doing my stratify on. So we're going to do a stratify on the invoice amount field, and I'm going to first run a statistics on it before I run the stratify, and I'll show you why. So we'll hit OK. Now this gives you a high and low value, and what's kind of interesting behind the scenes for those who care, you can go to Edit Variables, and you can get a lot of these, almost every one of these had come from this statistics command, and you can take a look at all these high, low, max 1, etc. Okay, now that I have that data, if I go to Analyze Stratify, and I select the invoice amount field, the minimum and maximum immediately come up in this data set. So I have that completely set, and that'll show up in the resulting report. And now going into the free category here, I don't like so much going with intervals of 10. It doesn't really give you a good cut of the data. I do want to make sure that I'm stratifying on as well as accumulating what I care about. I mean, I could accumulate the discount field and the invoice amount field, but I'm just going to take a look at this invoice amount field. And in the free category, you need to go upwards. I mean, even if you're in a negative situation, you could have a negative 100 in addition to a negative 80, and after that, negative 60, etc., 0. And then going upwards from there, and it always has to climb. Now, what I've done is I've actually saved a file that has all of the strata that we may want, and we'll just run a couple of them here. We called it Ways to Stratify, and this will be in the files that come with this. And if now I go back to that Stratify command, just real quickly here, and go on the invoice amount field, accumulate invoice amount. In the free, I can now just paste that information that I copied from that other file. Now I can do it 0, 100, 500, 1,000. Let's take a look at that. And again, that will give you the stratification. In addition to, let's take a different approach here and just do powers of 2, just increasing 2s. Again, very interesting way. The 2s go up very quickly, as everyone knows. And again, I can go back and edit this command. And in the free category, I can now put in my powers of 2 by copying and pasting that in. Real easy. You don't have to enter it all the time. And then that gives you another kind of view of the data. Now the Stratify comes with a graph, so you can actually graph it by just clicking down below here, text or graph. And this does provide you a graph that may be easier for you to see. A lot of people enjoy the pictures more than the actual text. Table, which is here. And similar to the classify age command, the percent of count points to the count. The percent of field points to the invoice amount. Now that the basic stratify command is understood, I want to show how to stratify but using a break command. And the break is here. So let's just do this the quick way. We'll go back, command line, click there. We'll edit the dialog box to bring this back. And in the More button, I'm going to select a break and put the enterer's initials. And by doing that, I'll click OK. And I'm going to get an interesting result. It's kind of odd. It starts with JL, goes to FS. So there's a break now. And each time we get a different enterer initial, we get a different stratification. You know, again, back to JL, JC, back to JL. Sounds kind of crazy. What's basically happening is there's one record for each of these people, and it's unsorted data. Now, what you need to do is actually take the paid invoice file and sort that file, in this case on enter initial, and we're going to do this to a new file called sorted. Now that we have this field sorted on enter initial, we're in a much better position to run this stratify break command. Whoops, let's go back to the log. Easy way to do it. This one here. And we'll just go back to this edit command log. This will work. We'll click on the More button, break, enter initial again. Now, though, we are on the sorted file, so it is sorted on enter initial, so the break is going to, hold a lot better. And this is the result you get. You get a nice little breakdown of each person and where they are actually, hitting from a dollar's point of view for each one of the items that they're entering into the system. Just kind of quickly taking a look, you can see FS has a lot of $0 to $99. JC kind of has a good, splattering of info, but starting to get into the upper realms there, from a dollar's point of view. Then JL has quite a bit, 10,000 to 100,000 especially, and KW even having more, etc. So, and then this one person just having a negative item. So it's something, gaining that perspective of looking at the stratification by a different perspective, who, in this case, is entering the invoice, can give you a much different perspective of what invoices to take a look at. Now, when you want to do that research and select an item, let's just say this 5,000 in negative, you can select this right here, brings you right to your filtered items, and you can take a look at all of the items here that are less than 0 in this case. And, well, in this case, we also want them where the enterer is NP, and hence, so when we go to that, because it's sorted, they're right there, but I can filter even further and get to those items that, in just this case, $5,104, just to make sure. We can go over to the invoice amount field and go analyze total, $5,104. The crosstab feature of ACL or command will give more of a column perspective to any summarization. So you could summarize by vendor on the row side, but then you could have it broken out by department in that summarization by the column side. So it's almost like a stratification into the columns for department, and then summarizing all of that by vendor. which would represent the rows. It's very similar to pivot tables if you've ever worked with those in Microsoft Excel. And again, just like the summarize command, you want to be a little bit careful with the cross tab in that you need to sort things. So doing some practicing with the cross-tab command, if we can take the analyze, cross-tabulate, and in this case what we want to do is take a look at the actual enterers. So the enterer initial can be the rows in this particular case, and then for the columns what we'll do is we'll make that the pay year month in a way to cross-tabulate on that category. And we're going to accumulate the invoice amount field. And for right now, we'll just keep it very simple and just include that. The only thing that I will include in addition to that is the invoice, or in this case, count of invoice transactions. So that will also be provided as separate fields. So let's take a look at that. You have to go to Output, and in the name field, we're going to call this Cross Enterer Time. So it's a little interesting to look at. I mean, we have basically the invoice amount, the count, etc. Now, I did this to show that this may be the way you like to look at things. So that is one option of how to do it. Another option would be go back to the log and taking a look at that cross-tab command. Now, with this in effect, what we could do is actually just get rid of the invoice amount and just go include count. And we'll do it to the same file. So now we just have by enterer a count cross-tab. I'm going to do this one more time. Go back to the paid file. Go to the cross tab and edit command. And in this case, instead of a count, we'll put amount. But this time, I am going to put amount at the end of this. So now we just have the amount cross-tabulated by enterer and by year. So this can make for excellent graphing within Excel. Just to drop that into Excel and graph that as a line chart. It ends up being about 5 lines in this case for each enterer, and you can kind of see the the trending up and down by enterer, which is quite interesting and useful. But we'll keep that out of this course for today. Now, just to show you a different perspective and rather quickly, notice how we do have a lot of these pay year months that go out for many columns to the right, and we only have 5 of the enterer initials. This, as you would do this type of work, you'll start to see what data falls where. You know, if we summarize this by vendor, you would have more vendors probably than you do columns. So that makes a lot of sense. But in this particular case, as you do this type of analysis, you realize sometimes it makes sense for us to put the enterer initial, in this case, as the column and vice versa. And again, easy to do. Another thought that you might want to consider is just consolidating these columns a little bit in some way, if that is possible. If it is departments, maybe you could do it by company code instead of department, and that brings it up one level. In this case, let's go back to the paid invoice file, and I'll show you one trick we can do. So in this particular field, I went to the edit table definition. In this pay month year, I can actually, I just want to see if I have this field in there. I don't have a pay year field. What I can do is I can go into the pay year month and copy that information there, which is going to be a little bit of code we'll use in a second. And we can call this pay year, and that again would be setting up with the check date and for 7 and going for 4. Just want to make sure that your year is always in the basically the last 4 digits of that date. So we do want to make sure of that. So let's kind of make sure that we go to Tools, Options, and in the numerics dates, we have month, monthly, day, year, 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 year. So we're okay there. And now what we can do is we can cross-tabulate this paid invoice file. Again, the invoice file that has all of the detailed transactions, and we can do it by pay year and enter. Now we know there's not that many years, so it kind of makes sense. And we'll also just do the invoice amount here, and maybe we can just call this something like pay year cross, just for right now. So again, we either had data in 1996 from the payment year, the check date year, or we had nothing, and it was basically open items that's in the data, and then you can see that by enter being entered into the system. So just wanted to show how you may want to consolidate columns at times or flip the columns so that it's a little bit easier to kind of read and utilize, because ultimately I tend to dump this out to an Excel so that I can graph it a lot nicer. And just to get another perspective, instead of doing it by enter or department or company, one of our earlier exercises was creating a stratification by pay month year. And what you could do in this particular case is to cross-tabulate that, making the stratify range actually, in this case, we'll make that the columns, and the pay month year, in this case, the rows. So, there's a fair number of those. And in doing that, we're going to summarize the invoice amount too. I do remember that this invoice amount too is the actual amount, so that we're going to care more about that. I'm not going to include account, and we can call this year, month, cross. And again, interesting to kind of see, not only does the sort order of that field that we created, keep it nice and tight in the way that it lines it up. And in addition to that, let me just get back here, you can also see it by year. Again, great way to kind of look at the yearly sort of change in stratifications over the month period over that past year. So as you can look here and see various time frames where the spend in certain strata or category goes up. And just kind of jumping out to some of the larger values here, because that's more interesting. We'll format it so we can see it a little bit better. You start to see what are those months that you do get a couple of spikes, and maybe taking a look at the strata one below. Once again, you can very quickly see 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 or 5 of these actually jump out more so than any others. And you can just look by month to see that more clearly. Again, kind of the power of these pivot tables or cross tabulations in making it very easy to see things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to see in your data. Okay, so we're back and just working with the polling question. Which command should be preceded by a sort or the use of a pre-sort command? The statistics, the stratify, the basic stratify, not one with a break, but the basic stratify, crosstab, and age. So which one requires a sort? And again, just for NASBA purposes, we need to ask these questions for to make sure that we can give you CPE at the end. And not seeing many questions coming in, and just noting for ourselves kind of where we'll head from here. Wanted to quickly show you the duplicate command as well as the data menu itself, just kind of walking through aspects of the data menu. And one in particular, the searching a database part, which I kind of like, and how to merge some data tables together. And we're kind of moving now from more of the analyze, where we're stratifying and cross-tabbing and doing more pivot tabling, into things like more of a record type auditing, where you're auditing duplicates, or taking or searching for certain records, or joining records, or merging records together. It's all kind of data related, and that's the differential here as we go into that portion. And then the final portion of the day will be on sampling, but again, most of what we're going to do now is getting into kind of the data side of things. Okay, so let me close off this poll just to kind of keep on track time-wise today. Don't see any questions coming in. I'll share that over. And good guess. We did actually talk about the stratify with a break needing a sort, but the normal stratify command does not need to be sorted, prior to doing a stratify of the debit amount, like we did as an example. Crosstab, though, does. Age and statistics does not. So again, think about, how do you need to line up data before organizing it? You would think a stratify does need to sort it, but ACL kind of does that automatically for you, except for when you use that break command. But the crosstab and the summarize, even the duplicates, lining up things so that you could do a duplicate test, you kind of have to sort it first and then go from there. So without further ado, let me kind of jump into the next segment. And I'm just actually I just had one question. Okay, I'll answer this question when we get back on the next polling, and we will go from there. So hold on one second. So now, taking the paid invoice file and completing a duplicate test on it, we can go to the Analyze Duplicates function. And once there, we can complete a duplicate test now on every field available, including invoice amount, invoice number, etc. It's not that one needs to be an ASCII or date field. You're able to do duplicates on everything. Now, in doing the duplicates, you're then able to kind of pipe down what you'll show in the final report. So if you just want to list a few of the fields, this gives you the ability to do that. Notice again, the pre-sort is set to go, and something definitely that you should use in any duplicate test. Without the pre-sort, you really don't even have any sort of duplicate test. It's just going to be garbage in, garbage out. Because if you wanted to do a duplicate test on invoice amount, you have to line up all the invoice amounts from smallest to biggest and take a look at which one is jumping up the most from a duplicate perspective. Okay, so let's take a look at maybe same invoice amount, same invoice date, and if I can find it, same invoice vendor. So invoice amount, date, and vendor. And if this gets a little confusing to go up and down here, you can always select the duplicates on, and then you can decide which ones you want to select. In the list fields category, we'll just kind of very quickly bring them over. Again, the pre-sort is set. We'll go to the output option, and in the output option, we're just going to write, duplicates. And I like to maybe just put in, invoice date, subnum, and amount, which produces this result here. And again, we have a duplicate on the invoice amount, invoice date, the vendor number in this case as well, and with the other information then listed out to the right, that was not part of these key fields. The key fields are always put to the left, which makes it really easy to know what was the test done on. You can usually, you can look to the left to get them. You just need to kind of check where it stops. Now, if you ever need to look that up and you don't, invoice date, supplier number, amount, it does tell you that, but you can go to your tools, table history, and that will provide you how was this created, duplicates on, invoice amount, invoice date, vendor number, other, check date, etc. So again, that is a simple duplicates command where we're doing it on invoice amount and date, we're listing fields out, and we're sending it to a final file. And prior to running the duplicates, basically ACL will run this pre-sort to ensure that the data is lined up for processing. The data menu of ACL allows you to complete many data management functions as well as test for data quality and do some searching into the data. So let's take a look in ACL and walk through this menu one by one. Now in ACL, first off, it makes a lot of sense to open up a data file, and it makes the menu then active. Now what we can do is we can extract data. By extracting data, we'll talk about how you can extract if something's true, or you could extract and put one file on top of another. We could export data to another application, such as Excel or a text document. There are some crystal reports, which is outside of the scope of today's discussion, but we can create crystal reports that would then be able to immediately report on that information in more of that crystal format. We can index the data by creating an index, and by indexing the data, it sorts that data. And you can create multiple indexes, which if you look right over here, you can then just select. So if you had this table and you had multiple indexes of this table, you just select whatever index you want, and it then applies itself. Indexing works well with relating tables, and actually if you ever relate tables, it automatically creates the index. You have to create an index in order to relate tables. And relating tables is very similar to the Access format of putting tables together, where you have a bit of a visual view and you're able to add tables and then relate them and combine them in ACL. The report feature allows you to produce printed reports in ACL, and you can create multi-line reports and views in ACL. It's a bit outside of the scope of today's discussion because I don't use this very much. I normally export to Excel, but when we talk about exporting, I will show you the report option. I just, again, find printing anything out or even printing to PDF, I question how much people will utilize that. However, it is an approach and something that can be utilized if you want to do that. Joining tables together, similar to the relating tables, but the relating is always going to be a join primary join, whereas joining tables, you can join primary, secondary, matched, unmatched, many-to-many. There's so many options in the join feature. And the two different, one other difference, main difference, is that the relate tables, it's more of a logical relation. So it looks good in your view here, but it isn't an actual table on your hard drive. There are benefits to that. The join table will then create a physical table on your hard drive that is joined, and that it therefore creates more hard drive space, but it is something where that final file will be a lot quicker. Merging tables is similar to extracting and appending, where you're merging two files together. Only difference there is that the merge table will be sorted. And I find that most of the time I use extract append, but merge is out there and something to do. In order to run a lot of these commands, you can sort your records, or very similar to the index, you basically sort. The index and the sort is like the relate to the join. The index is more of a logical index. The sort is more of a physical sorting of those records, and it creates a file that is fully sorted. Verify will verify the data type. So if you have a date field and then you have letters in the date field, it will have a problem with that. The search feature is something where you can search through an entire table for something, and we'll show you some practical examples of how to do that. It's very useful if you want to try to find something quickly. And then, which is more of importing data, we kind of locked in the external data, the external definition, and the server type options here, which again is outside of the scope of today's discussion. This is more of importing data, whereas most of these commands, with the exception of crystal reports, are really data management commands of once the data is in ACL, what can we do with that? So I just want to show you, as I close this table and go back to my data menu, you can kind of see some of the things we're not going to talk about today just highlight themselves quickly. And then as I open a table, those items that we are going to talk about obviously now are not grayed out and are able to be selected. Okay, so I just wanted to show you just a couple of other quick things here with that data menu that I don't think we went through. And one is how to locate a record, and then locating if. So in this case, it's kind of simple, but if we want to locate record 15, it'll bring us right to record 15. Now, when it's record 1,220,000, it's a lot, more useful than when you're going to 15, but, you kind of get the idea. And the locate if, and then you could just put an expression in, like invoice amount here is greater than 10,000, and it will, bring us to the first item, which is 13,000. But again, you could edit that command to be however you'd like. But I really like that search function. You don't realize it, but when you do have a really big file, how the search function can kind of find like an invoice number really quickly for you than you might have otherwise noted. Okay, so without further ado, let me continue on. We're going to now jump into some extracting and merging of files. Hopefully that's okay. Okay, everybody's still seeing my screen here. Okay, great. And what I find with the data extract function, and obviously extracting either the entire record or the actual fields that you're extracting for this particular review, and normally kind of if something's true. Now, what I find is that in merging data together, so that this is a concept called merging. If we have this paid in, actually, I almost want to go back to this simple report here. And what you want to do is make sure that your table layout is the same between this file, let's say, and your other file that you're going to kind of merge. But again, if I take this file just to show you and, kind of send, I would even say the fields here, be more particular, and just say these particular fields and do it to a new table called cross-vendor merge. Let's say this is last year's data. You could then add in this year's data as well, and you could extract to, let's see if it sends me to, okay, so cross-vendor merge. And in the more option, we're going to say append to file, and we'll select all these fields here. So it's going to send it, okay, these fields, just like we did before, same order. We're going to put append to existing file, cross-vendor merge, hit OK, and notice the new table now has everything kind of in there, and notice how it I guess, has double the information. And I wanted to show that for merging data together, a lot of people will have, say, the cross-vendor table, and just by looking at your display, by typing in display in your command line, you can get this. You can really understand a lot about the lengths of fields and the data fields that you have when you're merging or putting one table on top of another, and as we did here. So again, I wanted to show you the merge command, and now we'll jump into the join command so that you could take a look at that. Next up, what I wanted to do is join a last year file that is smaller to a this year file, which is bigger. I'm going to summarize them first, and we're going to summarize on vendor number, and then we're going to do these joins of these two files, and I'm going to show you the differences between a primary join, a secondary join, and then a primary and secondary join, which will help us show the differences. But also, I want to then improve on that join by creating a final calculated vendor number field, which uses the primary and secondary table in the results. And this will make more sense in looking at an actual example in ACL, so let's go there now. Therefore, in the seg duty test, we're looking for situations where the vendor create user is the same as the invoice create user. And that's a segregation of duty issue because a person could create a phony vendor and then they could create the invoice for that vendor and pay themselves and no one would know. So we like to look at this test. What I normally find with this test is that there is a manager or high-level supervisor that does have this type of access, but it really should be monitored, and it should be very rare that they're using this. Another time it does come up is if there's a small department and the person has to do everything. And again, this is a case where it does still make a lot of sense to take a look at any new vendors that are created. Are there any major payment trends with ones that have just been created by the same person that there's an invoice for? So there's a lot here that you can test. When we look at the actual data, we're going to make sure that that vendor create username is in the vendor master file, and it's also the invoice create username is in the payment file. And we're going to join the payment file in this first step to the vendor table. And by doing that join, we're going to be doing it on vendor number, and we're just trying to see, do they match? And that's kind of step 2 here. Once I've joined on vendor number and gotten the vendor name brought over to my paid history file, I can extract if the vendor name is now equal to the invoice enterer name. So in switching over to ACL, I noticed that there is a script I created called seg duty, but I first wanted to show how to build that script. And one way to do this is to go into your log. This is how I generally do it. And I like to create a new session, and I could call this seg duty test. And now that I have this session open, I can open up the file that I first want to take a look at, which is the paid invoice file. And in opening up that paid invoice file, I notice that somewhere in here we have the enterer initial. And that enterer initial is who entered that particular invoice. I also notice if I go over to the vendor master file, and this is sample data. Most of these do not have an enterer, but there is this one vendor down below here that does have an enterer, and we'll look at that one as well. So the goal right now is for us to join the paid file to the vendor master file, and I'm going to do that on vendor number. So I'm going to do basically select data, join tables, and I'm going to select the vendor master file, and on vendor number, I just need to find that in both files. That will be the key field that I'm joining on. Now, you don't have to worry as much these days with the newer versions of ACL, but I always like to make sure that the field is the same length that I'm matching on and the same type or format, in this case ASCII. And in the primary field position, I will actually just bring over every field. And in the secondary field position, I'm going to bring over the vendor enterer. Just in case I don't have all of my vendors in the vendor master file that are in my invoice file, I'm just going to be a little careful and say include all primary records in this join. And that's in the more options. And I will do this to a new file called joined. Many times I will use a common name like joined or extracted or summarized if that file is going to be overwritten over and over, and this is no exception. So with this set, I'm now creating this combined file where I'm going to grab the vendor enterer field and bring it over into this paid file that we started out with. So this is my join file that now that I look over to the right here, I will have a vendor enterer whenever there was one, and there were a few here where you could see that JL starting to show up like we saw in the vendor master file. So what we can do now is an extract statement or a filter. In this case, I'll just do a filter, and by selecting the Edit View filter, I can look for where the enterer initial, which is the invoice version of the enterer field, is equivalent to the vendor enterer field. And again, it's always a good idea to take a look when you're matching two fields just to make sure that they're the same length. Here it's to ASCII for vendor enterer, and for enterer initial as well. You may want to use the sub function if we needed to convert that as an option as well. But because they're the same type and the same length, we can hit the OK button. And we will see that there is one vendor, the water company, that has been set up by the same person who has also set up that vendor. Now, I always find it interesting once I find these situations to take a look at other invoices that have been entered by the same person. So let's take a look at where the enterer initial now equals JL, which was that two-character field for all of the invoices. And now you can classify, just to take a look at, well, how many vendors does this person enter invoices for? And then based on that, you can make your own conclusion as to what other invoices you may want to sample beyond the ones that are the clear segregation of duty situations where the enterer of the vendor equals the enterer of the invoice. So if we take a look at the log that's been created, we can actually select everything in that seg duty item that we created. And I like to right-click that and say Save Selected Items to a script. And we'll just call this seg duty test version. And that will create a script. I'm just going to move up from my tables folder up to my scripts folder. And in looking at the script, it's a little disjointed here. There's a little bit going on here. Let me just clean this up. First off, we open up the paid invoice file. We then open up the vendor master file secondary, like we talked about. We join the vendor number with those fields listed here. And just as a quick note, a simple thing you can do is highlight all those fields if you want to bring everything over and change that to the word all. So that's a lot easier to read when you're looking at your code. And okay, let's go back. So with vendor enterer and primary to joined. Now, what I'd like to do at this point, and it happened down here, I'm going to bring that close secondary command to be after my join command. It's always a good idea to have a close of the secondary file so that if you try to join another file, sometimes ACL will not allow you to open up two secondary files at the same time, and then hence an issue. So what we could do at that point is that join statement is now built for us. We can then set the filter as noted here. We could classify that. We could then set up the filter and then classify that, and this script will run. I mean, up front here, as shown previously, we would like to add a set safety off, and then at the bottom, we'll have a set safety on. So again, a cleaner version of the script, trying to quickly do that because the reality is I've already built this script for you, and it's something that you can very easily right-click and run, just like we did with other scripts. And you can, again, select the paid invoice file, select the vendor file, we'll do a couple of steps here. It'll say, select the vendor number and the vendor enterer field, and you'll select that and it'll continue. But I'm going to cancel this for now. All I can say to you is that you can run that seg duty test not only on the data that's provided, but also on your data as well.
Now let's explain how to take the paid invoice file and the prior paid invoice file and join them together in a primary and secondary way. So let me just first, before I do this, I'm going to summarize the paid invoice file on vendor number. Just keep this real simple, and we'll create a table just called ven sum new, and I'm just going to accumulate that invoice amount, vendor number. Very, very simple. This is the ven sum new. Now I'm going to go to the prior paid invoice file, and I'm going to execute the same command, which I can do by going to my log and selecting the summarize command in my log, making sure that the command line is shown. But instead of it being new, I'm going to say old. And then that will create this other file that now I have ven sum new and old. Now, notice the old has 26 records or 26 vendors, and the new one has 32 vendors. So just keep that in mind as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to join these two tables together. It'll take just a second because of the small size of these files, and we'll take the two vendor numbers as the key fields. I'm fine with actually bringing over all primary and secondary fields. Now, I'm not going to do anything here. I'm just going to set this up in a standard way, if you will. And we're going to do this to a new file called joined matched. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to take these 32 records, match it to the ven sum old. Now, there were 26 records in the old, and, again, the 26 records in the old match the 26 records in the new, and I have a joined match 26 records. But again, keeping in mind, it's only, there were records here that we lost in that comparison. So notice here we have the primary file, secondary file set. I'm going to go back to my log, click on that join primary key button, and then I'm just going to click this edit command. And now that I have it edited, I do have the pre-sort secondary primary. I'm going to go to my more button, and I'm going to say include all primary records. And we'll do this to a joined primary. Now I have my 32 records, and any time that there's a situation where there's a blank here, meaning that the vendor number in the old file does not exist, keep in mind this was the new file that we had primary. These are the secondary fields, which ACL has now added a 2 to that field name because it's exactly the same field name as the primary. And notice the 2s. So we now have this table here with a bunch of blanks in between there. Just to kind of finish the exercise here, just to go back, I'm going to go back to the ven sum new. I have my ven sum old. Go back to my log, go to my last statement here, which had the primary in it. I'm going to go edit command. And in the more button, just for right now, we're going to say include all secondary records. Now, I do know that there are not vendors in the old that should be carried forward to the new. I know that they're not there, but if they were there, those would then carry over. We'll kind of put a primary, secondary here. Those would carry over, and if there's, let's say the 161500 did not exist in the primary table, the new table, this would be blank, yet this would be here. So just to show you the three different join statements, join matched, join primary, and join secondary, and why you want to use them. I personally find, and you find that Microsoft Access uses a joined primary approach as the staple, because you never want to lose records from your original file when you're joining it to a secondary one. So I think joined primary you should always be using, except for when you're looking for matches and only matches, which does happen. and in a lot of the tests that we do. So you need to know the difference, I suppose, between the two. But I do find don't lose records, and remember that as you're working with your files, and that's how this joint primary and secondary can help you in that exercise. Just to tidy up this final join primary and secondary table, I want to show you how to improve upon this vendor number field. Now, the invoice amount and account, if it doesn't exist, as you have here, you have the secondary being blank or 0 in this case. So that's okay. I mean, and actually for our analysis, if I want to, do some calculations now on these fields, they'll have some zeros in that case, but there's no real issue in doing this. Now, the vendor number field is a little annoying because is it this one? Do I need to look at that one? What we can do is we can create a calculated field, and we're going to call this vendor number new. And the default value, I will use this vendor number field. However, if the vendor number field, and I might want to just do an all trim just to be safe here, equals 1 blank space. Again, if all trim will get rid of all blank spaces in that field, if it equals just 1 blank space in that first primary field, we'll then put the secondary field in there of vendor number 2. So in vendor number 2 would be the old value. Now that I have that calculated field set up, I just close this. I can add the vendor number new to my view, and sure enough, we actually have now this fully calculated field. I can get rid of these, mind you. And now I have an analysis that looks quite nice, and this has more, all vendor numbers, new data, old data, all nicely lined up for analysis.
Okay, and before we jumped into a polling question, I just wanted to note one thing with ACL, and that is with the actual join command, you might notice that there's this index and relate commands as well, and the relate table is again more of in the logical brain of ACL versus in a physical way, so it's more logically it's being done in the background, whereas the join command actually creates a physical table on your hard drive. And the same is true with indexing. And the videos we give you, in addition to the course, will kind of go through a lot of these other topics like indexing and relating tables in relation to the actual joining. But with that said, let me launch this next poll. And which file technique leads to a physical file that is sorted? Is it index, relate, stratify, or join? And again, the key there is physical versus logical. And I've been answering the questions that have come through. And I'm just taking a look on them and trying more or less in the questions. Some of the questions I've had seem to relate around data formatting and how to kind of, redefine things. And hopefully like that all trim command that I just showed, which will kind of trim everything to the left and also trim any spaces after that, say, vendor number in that case, that's helpful. But did want to answer that question. And again, looks like most of you are voting, so we do appreciate it. It kind of speeds things up. We have a lot to talk about here, so you want to get through this. What we'll be doing next is going through the join function, as well as the unmatched join and the many-to-many join, which are more complex join functions. But again, unmatched, many-to-many, and then right after that, we'll get into the sampling function. And then we'll have like a polling question in between there. But I wanted to note kind of what's left on the agenda for today. Let me hide this poll or close the poll and share it. And most of you are correct there. It is the join command that creates a physical table. Stratify does not. Relate, it does make it more logical. It's in the background. And index, that's what that one does as well. Instead of sorting a file to a physical file, the index command will sort it more in a logical, in the brain of ACL kind of way. Okay, so just continuing on with no questions, let me get on to the unmatched join. So hold on just 1 second here.
The unmatched join will search through the primary table in relation to the secondary table, and it'll carry over primary records that are not in the secondary table. So you basically have primary records not in the secondary table are then produced as a final table. And it's a great test if you want to look for, say, employees not on the payroll, vendors that are not in the payables table. Again, we would open the payables table first or the payroll table first, primary, and match it then to the employee or vendor table, respectively, and then get your final result. And the test that we're going to do is we're first going to take the payables table, match it to the vendor table, look for differences, and then we're going to, just to show another example, is take a summarized version of the vendor table or summary by vendor number for the current year to last year. So we're doing kind of a current to last year test and saying, who do I have this year that I didn't have last year? So let's go to ACL and take a look at some of these examples. So as I said, the first test that we're going to do is take the paid invoice file, and I'm going to match it to the vendor master file. And the goal here, by vendor number, and again, by vendor number. So the key field that we're going to use is the vendor number, in this case, and the primary fields that I'm going to bring over, I'm going to bring everything over, may as well. Now, this will be interesting. I am pre-sorting secondary, pre-sorting primary, output table, but if I go to the More button now, I want to select the unmatched primary record. So it is telling you exactly what it's going to do. It's great. And we'll go back to the main. And this one I will call unmatched. Maybe I'll just make it like unmatch. And we'll have payments, AP. And this again will take the primary table. Notice the secondary table gets grayed out because it's primary, not in secondary. There's no secondary fields to select at this point. So I'll hit OK. And sure enough, it did find some vendor numbers. Let's just kind of go over just to test this out here. So we have two of them, 1564218, 23542. So I'm just going to I took a copy of that first field there. I'm going to go into the vendor master file table now, and just really even do like a find, just to make it very simple, and look for, if this shows up anywhere in the file, please let me know. And you can't even find it. So it's something where this unmatched join will identify, let's just go back, unmatched payments to AP. These are payments where I have some payments, however, not that much money, actually some credits, which is really weird, but they do not exist in the vendor master file. Now, just to show a different example, I have the then sum new, 32 records of summarized vendor numbers, and then old. And again, sometimes just to do a quick test here, you could do a matched primary and secondary. But if I just said, I want to match the vendor number now to my vendor sum old. So vendor number, primary key, secondary key, vendor number, primary fields, we'll add them all. Go back to our More button, unmatched, and I can then say unmatch, then some new. And these are going to be records that are new to our vendor summary in the current year that were not in the prior year. So I can hit OK. And sure enough, I get my 6 records, which, mind you, we have 26 here, 32 there. And these are the 6 records that are unmatched when you look across the primary to the secondary table.
One of the more classic tests is to test the vendor to employee master files and looking at either name or address. In this test, we're going to be looking at the address field and also taking a look at doing joins in different ways to get different and better results. So first off, we're going to calculate a couple of expressions, or in this case, a address field where it'll just be the first 30 characters that are numbers only, so just the numbers. And then the other one is just 8 characters within the address. So the first 8 characters in the address, regardless if they're numbers or letters or blanks or what have you. And then we're going to kind of do that join on the vendor to employee file, but in 2 different ways. I want to show the differential of doing it in a normal joined fashion and then in a many-to-many fashion. So heading over into ACL, we can take a look at the ven payer script. And while it will have a dialog up front, which we will run, and it will ask us some questions, I wanted to get into the couple of calculations that are done below here. So in first case, I'm taking the vendor fields, and I'm calculating what are going to be fields that have only the numbers in there, as well as the first 30 of that, and then the first 8 characters of that address field, regardless what's in there. And I'm utilizing the remove function in this first more useful test here, where we're basically taking the address field, which is set up here as the number field V is address field, and we're going to remove everything but 0, 1 through 9. Now, as an alternative to the remove function, we can just do this right here. We can use the include function. That is a change in recent versions of ACL, going from that. And then after that, we're going to use the sub function of that field above that was calculated, only numbers. And that sub will calculate from the first character to the 30th character, or 30 characters in numbers. You probably don't need 30 in character. You probably could work with maybe 10 or so. And also, I hope that this, looking at these 3 or 4 expressions, helps you to think about how you could use this elsewhere. One thing that you might want to do to edit the script a little bit better is we can take that include function and include it down in the sub function down below. So if I say include, and we just put a comma here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Just got to be a little careful with the commas here, and then close bracket. That include function will only include numbers here. Now, what I could do is continue, further into this and add all of the, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and just have all of the letters of the alphabet here as well. And then this would only include numbers and letters, first 8 characters. So again, just showing you some variations here of calculated fields that you can make between the vendor and the employee file. Once you've done that, we're pretty much then joining these files in a few different ways and getting some results. So let's run this script. I'm not going to save what I did, and I'm going to run the payer script. So the application will match the address field with the vendor field. And let us select now the vendor master file and the employee master file, vendor address, and employee address. Does some calculations, and I want you to just notice this one report here where we have 2 matches. We have 7 Wall Street. We'll go over to the right here. We have 7 Wall Street that is matching up with an employee of 7 Sunset Lane. Notice this match, when done, let me go back into that VenPayR program. When we look at the join statement down below here, notice This is a normal matching join statement. So if I were to take, say, the paid invoice file and join this to the vendor master file, for argument's sake, in the more options, you have include all primary, include all secondary, unmatched, many-to-many. What I did in this first test in VenPayR is what we're only doing is just for those matched items. So we're doing no primary, no secondary, no unmatched, nothing like that. And notice when we get a result, we're only getting that one matching item. So that brings us to a point of the many-to-many matching in ACL, and something that I built a script so that you can run this in a many-to-many fashion, what we just did, and you will get a different result. You know, the problem is if I take the primary vendor table and join that to the secondary employee table, this 7 Wall Street will match up to 7 Sunset Lane, which it did in the analysis. However, these 2 other records in the employee table that might match don't come through. And you know, this could have been 7 Wall Street, and that would have been a good match. However, we would have never seen it because, in essence, the many-to-many match does not stop at the first join. It will join every one. And also from a secondary match point of view as well, it'll join those back to the primary. So it's many-to-many. So when I go back into ACL, we have the VenPayR updated for the many-to-many. And if I double-click on that, the only difference in this script at this point is in the join command, at the end of it, we put the word many. So that's done in every join statement down below as you go. And that many-to-many match, let's just run this one quickly here, as you notice, will give us a much different result. So by selecting all of the vendor files and vendor and employee address files, if I go back to that address number join that used to only have the 7 Wall Street, we now have all 3 7 Wall Streets matching up to the 7 Sunset, Dimension, and New Star lanes. This completes the testing, and I would suggest that you use many-to-many matching on any vendor to employee type testing that you're doing, because you will find, obviously, many more and proper matches than you ever would from the standard joining type processes. I do find that ACL does a great job of providing the statistics behind both of those so that you can utilize ACL pretty effectively to get the job done for you. So let's continue on here. So what is sampling in the first place? And just looking at all the good books out there on the topic, what is it? Sampling is the practice of selecting individual items from a population to estimate properties of that population. And we're going to do that given some confidence levels around error patterns and what you expect to happen. So the real thing here is that it's statistical. It isn't judgmental or non-statistical sampling. When I talk to a lot of auditors, what I find is that a lot of what they do is non-statistical. It's judgmentally selecting a bunch of items just by their eyeballs, and not to say that that is a bad thing because you don't want to use the computer completely. I think it's still a good idea to scan the data before you actually run your sample. But what's nice about a statistical sample is that it is going to allow you to extrapolate and to make more of a judgment against that whole population. So again, to estimate properties of that population, because you're calculating and estimating based on these confidence levels and what you're expecting, and then what you're able to kind of accept from an error pattern point of view. So again, you know, this was the main definition out there. Let's take a look at the steps that you would go through when going through a sample, no matter if you're doing monetary unit sampling or record sampling, because they're kind of the same thing. Actually, when you look at monetary unit sampling, what all the good books will tell you is that it is a form of attribute sampling. So it isn't something that is completely off the mark from all of the sampling techniques that are out there, and it's actually kind of very much in line. So the 7 steps here, set the audit procedure. I want to say I got these 7 steps and modified them a bit from a great book that we'll be showing later, which is Sampling for Internal Auditors. And you can buy it on sale from the IIA right now. For some reason it's on sale. But again, we can talk more about that in a minute. Anyway, the 7 steps here. We're going to set the audit procedure and the objective of that audit procedure, which drives your attributes for testing. Something, let's imagine we were taking a look at accounts payable and procurement, and we wanted to take a look for each accounts payable invoice. Does a purchase order exist for each invoice? Yes, no. That would be one, attribute. You may want to pick another one, such as, especially if you have the same, level of confidence in each one of these tests. Another thing you might want to say is, well, that the purchase order was filled out prior to the invoice showing up, because that happens a lot where, invoices show up and then people go, ooh, I need to get a purchase order for this. So that would be kind of the next yes, no. And you can have various attributes like that that you're assigning to that. The other thing from a monetary unit point of view is that you may want to look more at whether or not that value is over or understated. And again, give confidence levels on, based on some testing, I believe that accounts receivable is not overstated by this amount, and I have this much confidence and all that stuff. So we'll talk more about that in a second, but you can kind of see the difference here of, is it a yes-no question, or is it a value being over or under? But again, when you look at yes, no, and over and under, their attribute testing and monetary unit testing is very, very similar. So then you're going to set the population. And you could set the population, as most people do, as the entire population of, let's say, accounts payable invoices. You could do it for just 1 year and say we're just auditing a year. You could start stratifying that population and saying, anything over a certain amount, we're going to put in one bucket. Another, bucket will be the middle part, and another bucket is the small stuff. And for each one, we're going to have a separate sort of sampling approach. I mean, there's nothing to say that you couldn't have a judgmental approach for the small dollars, because they don't, let's say in aggregate, they don't add up to very much. You could decide to not sample it, or just, judgmentally pick a few or do a random pick, but it doesn't have to kind of meet all of the statistical guidelines. But now as you get to the larger ones, you might want to then say, hey, why don't we go to the statistical guidelines so that we can do more of an estimation based on that population. So just trying to give you some ideas here of what we'll talk about as we look at these steps. And next one is select a sampling method. I think it is going to tend to be more of a, is it a control that you're testing? That's more record sampling, random, fixed interval, cell. Or is it dollars that you're sampling? That's going to be monetary unit. You're going to calculate a sample size, which really good is that, we're going to talk through all of the inputs there. And again, this is where the math comes into it. And this is where I am not very good. So I use the computer. I don't know about you, but, I have a calculator next to me and I use it constantly because I like to, add up things and would rather use my calculator than my brain to do it. So calculating that sample size is something that ACL will do a very good job of. We can then go audit the sample, which will be done obviously manually by pulling records, taking a look, talking to people, etc. And then we're going to evaluate the sample, which will also be done in ACL. So the evaluation part is where you're going to essentially put in the inputs from the sample size selection, put in your outputs from the audit, the sample part. Did we have any errors? Were there any purchase orders that were not set up prior to the invoice? If so, that's a bad thing. We put that in there as an error, and then you evaluate the sample based on that error approach. Okay, so just moving onward here. Types of sampling. We've been kind of touching on this a bit over and over again as we start off here, so just wanted to show you these are the 3 types. It's attribute, control, record. sampling. It's like all these different names for the same thing. And within that, you have options. You have a random, a fixed interval, and a cell. Random is, let's just say you had a population of 1,000. It is going to randomly pick, say, 10 items from the 1,000. And it's just going to randomly do it. There's no order. For the most part, ACL will not allow repeats in there. So, you won't pick a sample of 10 and get 4 because all these repeats keep showing up. So you have to, make sure of that. And then from a fixed interval point of view, the fixed interval is something where it will go through and start, let's say, at the number 12 and fixed interval of 50 through that item, or let's say it was 10. It would start at 0, let's say, and go every 100 and pick 10 items based on the 1,000 divided by 100. And the last one is more of a cell where it's going to pick that interval. So it's picking the 0 to 100 or 1 to 100 in that case. And then it's going to calculate a random sample within that one strata. And then it goes from 101 to 200, and then, again, does a random sample within there. And that's a little bit, it feels like it's a better thing to do. Statistically, it tends to be all the same, but I find it's a little more useful in that the fixed intervals, you could start kind of picking things that are the same because they just show up in the data every 100th time. Whereas the cell, it's going to be a little more random, but yet, get more of a stratification of that population before it does it. So that's nice. And again, monetary unit, PPS sampling, we'll talk more about it, but essentially it's where the dollar unit is the unit in the sample. So the actual dollars in that case will be your unit that you're then working through. So a $1 million item has a million more of a chance of being selected than a $1 item. And so on and so forth. So, and the goal of that, because it's focusing on these larger items, it really does work more towards the evaluation side of things. So that's kind of where that's kind of, or sorry, over and under evaluation of things. Stratified sampling is going to be by amount or by transactional score, and I kind of threw that in there. Most people just do it by amount. Maybe by department type, by employee type, but I threw in the transactional scoring part because I think that it's useful to start risk scoring your transactions and then looking at it from that perspective. And again, we'll spend about 20 minutes or so later at the end of the broadcast to talk about that and how you can do it. And I show how to do it mostly in Excel with ACL kind of mixed in there as well, so that should be useful for you. Let's move on though to the hardest part, in my opinion, and I had to read various books, which I'll be showing you soon, so you can see. But for the most part, is what are the different types of inputs that go into the ACL calculation? And the good books kind of call it all these different names. So as you go through these things, I tried my best to give all the definitions in one place so that you can, make your assessment. And I'm just going to scroll to it quickly here. This is what ACL is going to ask for. So ACL is more or less asking for, from a record point of view, this confidence, population, upper error limit, expected error limit, and then from a size point of view on the monetary, confidence, population, materiality now, and then expected total errors as well in there. So you'll see, we'll talk more about that, but that's kind of what ACL calls it. Let's go back to what everyone calls it and kind of see how it relates. So for the most part, you have a population which is in a record sample, either your number of records, or in a monetary unit sample is more of, say, the dollars in a particular field, accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory. Then you have a confidence percentage, and the confidence percentage, some people will call it beta risk, is another name for this. And beta risk is the inverse of confidence. So it's basically the risk of incorrect acceptance, so that there's a 5% chance that I'm going to do this wonderful sample, and at the end of it, I'm going to make a bad calculation or a bad estimation, and in essence incorrectly accept that that population had, a proper controls around accounts payable. So that beta risk of, say, 5% or 10%, that is the inverse of confidence. And confidence would say, I'm 90% confident that by doing the statistical analysis of accounts payable spend, that these particular invoices that I'm testing for purchase orders are controlled. And I'm assuming then, as we move through this, that the upper error limit, that there's not, let's say, a percentage, how many errors can I withstand? I believe that the error percentage is less than 3%. So out of 1,000 items, you basically 30 items will have a problem with this whole purchase order to invoice scenario. Or from a dollars point of view, you put it in as a dollar amount. So you actually say, from a materiality point of view, my upper error limit in this case is, let's say, 250,000, and that is the maximum amount that I'm willing to kind of bet on in my 90% confidence calculation. And again, it goes by some different names here, depending on which book you read, so I tried my best here to give you a bunch of ideas. Then the expected total errors, it would either be an error rate and an error value. So what you also are saying is that the error, it could be in there, that there is, let's say, I expect at least 1% to be in there, but I do not expect more than 30. So it's kind of a low and a high of what you're expecting in the data. Then there's either an interval that's going to be calculated, which is either going to be more of a random kind of interval, or it's going to be an interval, which is something that is set, a fixed interval. And then you have the number of errors that you can tolerate, which is basically what's going to calculate from this. So from a sampling point of view, it's going to say to you that you're able to withstand, this many errors based on this population size and sample size, etc. So did my best here to try to explain each one of these. This is the input now in ACL. So if we're doing a record sample, we'll do this in practice, but 90% confident would go into the confidence section. Population of, let's say, 1,000 records. My upper error limit percentage, I believe there's less than 3% maximum of an issue, but I do expect a 1% expected error rate. It's and then it's going to calculate your number of tolerable errors, your interval, sample size, and then on the monitor unit side, it's more in kind of a dollars terms, but again, still giving you the same types of information. Okay, sampling size example and expectations. This is giving you now the example, and again, just to repeat above, we are 90% confident that the population error rate does not exceed the upper error limit of 5% with an expected error rate of 2%. So if with 134 item sample, interval of, depending on how big the population is, in that case it's 37, the number of tolerable errors is 3. So I can actually, as part of my 134 unit sample, if I find more than 3 wrong, I'm in trouble. And that's essentially what I need to look for. And so again, as we continue through this, what I find interesting is that based on statistics here, and this is where the math comes in, and I'm not as good at this, but it almost doesn't matter if you had 500,000 items or 5,000 items. They tend to kind of come up with the same sample size for that. And I'm sure there's a point in there where the population, if it's 500 million, you need to do a little bit more than 134. I didn't test that though. But in this case, I do find it very interesting that you're almost better off sometimes going with a larger kind of random sample and just going across it all, because then you can extrapolate based on that larger sample. It's not like more records leads to more sample size. So okay, just jumping into this next poll here. What is the name of the upper error limit in a monetary unit sample? Is it population, materiality, upper error percentage or confidence? What is the name of the upper error limit in a monetary unit sample? And just to conclude, on the day, we may run over just by a minute or two, but I wanted to kind of go through an actual random sample with you so that you could actually get into the more particulars, and that's what we'll be doing next. But if you don't mind doing this voting, I'm just trying to keep it a bit quick here towards the end. And then we'll get to any final questions that I've been trying to answer as we go along here. So again, what is the name of the upper error limit in a monetary unit sample? Population, materiality, upper error percentage, or confidence? Okay, everyone has voted. I'm going to close the poll and share that. The right answer is materiality. If you went back to that table where I kind of explained each one of the fields, that was the right place to go, and again, that was materiality. But without further ado, let me kind of jump back into the performance here, and just give me a second, and we'll continue on with a random sample just to close out the day. So just some quick thoughts on the ACL side of it before we jump into ACL and give you some actual exposure to ACL as a product from a record sampling point of view. The cell, again, is the combination of the fixed interval and random sampling. Fixed interval every 100, random, again, just random of everything. Cell is kind of the mixture of both, which I like a little bit better, but you decide what you'd like to do. Best to extract the data prior to sampling to ensure the population is properly set. So what I find is that you can sample with like if statements and filters and all that, but I just think it's a lot cleaner to make an extract of the data based on whatever criteria you have. And let's say one of the criteria might be to remove all voided items from the transactions before we do anything. That'd be a good example, and therefore something that we should do prior. Okay, we're not up to polling question 2. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to jump over to ACL. Okay, so we will be providing this data for you and also walking now through the various ACL concepts. All I have here is some invoice data. Could be accounts payable, could be sales data. I think it's technically sales data. But with that said, what we're going to do is we can sample with this data. We're going to sample with it in Excel a little bit later as well, just so that you get a varied perspective of sampling. But by clicking on the sample button, you have calculate, sample records, and evaluate, just like we had talked about in the slides. We have a population of 4,999, which you can see at the bottom there in your record type, the record view down below. What you can do if you wanted to filter, and let's just say for a minute here, just say anything where the amount is greater than 1,000, and taking a look here at this amount field greater than 1,000, we have a kind of, we have a question mark there, so we can do an analyze count and show that you have 2,276 items that are less than, greater than 1,000. Now, while I could continue onward here and go to sampling, what I normally do is I go to sample records, sorry about that, and go to record, and then click on the size button. If you do that, I know I did that pretty quickly, but you kind of go to sampling, sample, and then click on this size button right here. It's kind of I think it's a better way of doing things in that it will bring through the population that is set. So if I select random there as well, it will bring through this population. I always get a little bit nervous, though, because I wonder, given this is filtered data, is it going to kind of get that if statement in there properly, or do I need to add the if statement here to the sample? Generally speaking, you don't need to add the if statement here, but what I like to do, again, this just being a simple approach here, you could maybe say if it's payment date greater than a certain date. I always like to extract my data to a new file, and again, maybe we just call it extracted right now, so it's something we can easily overwrite a little bit later. And once we've, we have now this extracted data set, what we can now do is go back and do our sampling. And once again, our record's now 2276. Sampling. I click on sample records. We can go to record, in this case, because that's what we're doing. We have random, where it'll put the population in there, and again, it's set down here as well. We can go to fixed interval, where you can decide based on the size what that interval is, or we can go to cell. Let's just kind of stick with random, but now let me go to my size, and that, again, what that's going to do is set up the size as well as the seed in here, and how, basically how large we should make it. Let's play around with this just so you can kind of see, 90% confident out of a population of 2276 that my upper error limit is, say, 3%, and my expected error rate is 1%. Now, I think a lot of you may want to put 0.01, something like that, and 0.03. It feels like that's what you want to do here, but don't do that. You're stating it in the whole percentages, and then you click calculate. So, wow, population, I have to calculate a sample size of 178. Let me just say my upper error limit now is, say, 5%. Let's calculate that. Drops it down dramatically by 100 items. My expected error rate, let's say, go to 2%. That's going to bring it up again, so we kind of want to lower that down as much as we can. Let's keep going here and say my beta upper error limit in this case is 10%. We'll calculate that, and that brings it down to about 40. So, again, this is something that you can play with as you'd like to. I mean, I think most people would say that if I'm testing something, that probably, 5% is a pretty good number to say as an upper error limit, from a perspective of 2276 times 5% is about 114 items. So, you're saying that I'm 90% confident that we don't have 114 items that are not meeting this control, but I do expect about 22, to 23 of them to have a problem. And that's based on the expected error rate. Okay, so the sample size is 78, interval 29.17, and then there's the number of tolerable errors being shown. Okay, by clicking on the OK button, that brings us now back, and that size comes back here. Now, the seed, you can change the seed here. You can put in a number, some crazy number. I usually will just go with the random seed that ACL comes up with, but we'll talk about that seed in a few minutes here, because I'm pretty sure I can prove something to you using that seed. The seed is basically where is it going to start in this, in the record set when it does that random sampling. So, you can put something in there. My suggestion to you is to keep it blank so that it's randomly generated every time, and then that will allow you to do that. So again, you have population, our size is 78, blank on the seed, and let's go to a file called sample 90 _5 _1. Sounds good, and we'll hit the OK button. So that then pulled our sample of 78 items, and just kind of notice here, invoice number 20061, record 10, 20540. Not that you can remember all this stuff, but just try to keep that in the back of your mind a little bit. Okay, we'll go back now to the log of ACL, and let's take a look at that sample. So I like personally to copy this information. I do find that this is very useful for work papers to show what you did, how you did it, etc. Again, at this point, the seed was 24. So note that seed was 24. let's go back to that original data, which is called extracted. That was the one where I extracted items over than 1,000. Hit the sampling record, random, record, size of 78. Seed, I'm going to put in 24 now. And I'm going to go to a file called, we'll call it sample 95 version 2. So I followed the same technique, nothing changed. I just put this seed in there again. And what should have happened, I thought it would have happened, maybe I picked the wrong one, but I always thought that it would pick the same sample at that point. And I could be wrong about that. And so it said the initial selection point was 19 in this case. So it used the seed as a starting point in doing its random calculation. Some products that I've seen, they actually will pick the same sample twice for you. So it won't actually, so you'll end up getting literally the same records coming out. So invoice number would be like 20061 was like the first one coming out kind of thing. I'll just try to prove that to myself. Yeah, I mean, that is definitely not happening here, so that's good. I mean, that ACL is truly doing it in a random way, and there's no way to recalculate that random sample. It's something where it's randomly doing it each time. Again, I like to copy this because I think it's a useful set of work paper information. All right, now I'm just going to go back to the extracted file, and I'm just going to show you a couple of other options, everything else seems to work the same way. If I go to record, fixed interval, instead of random, and click on size, it's kind of the same stuff, right? I mean, it's 90. The upper error limit in this case is 5. The expected error limit is 1. I'm calculating, 78. Intervals 2917. I hit OK. So now this is where, again, it's going to interval through, and the starting point would be kind of like that random seed. Now this is where it will definitely pick the same items twice if you put the same start item here. So if I put in 24 2 times, it's going to start at the 24 record, go 29.17 if that's possible, and then 29.17 again and again. And it's going through that fixed interval of the records to ultimately get to a selection of 78. And it's going to kind of keep wrapping through the data until it does that. I like to keep the start blank, so then that way, again, it allows ACL to select a random kind of start point, and therefore, I think is just a better way to go. I will do this to, and now I'll call it maybe fit. Oops, sorry. Call it fix sample 90_5_1 for the fix sample. Hit the OK button, and interesting. We got 79 records because it was sort of one over. Probably because of that 29.17, and again, that is now your ultimate sample size. Okay, so let's go back now to the extracted file. We'll do this one more time, but now we're going to do this using cell technique. And again, I can put in, just to keep this quick here, I can put in the 29.17, and again, random seed. You have the option here of kind of seeding the data with a random seed or a seed that you'd prefer to use. I usually keep it blank, and then we'll do this to a file. Now this one's called cell, and the cell, as we've said a few times, is going to actually go through and randomly select an item between, say, 1 and 2917, and then 29.18 to 58 point whatever, 34. They'll keep kind of going through that calculation and randomly selecting within each interval. So let's click on that. Again, we get our 79 records, and it's sort of a combination. Okay, so for those of you, we are at the 3-hour mark, at the 2 o'clock mark. We did start a little bit late, but yet you've done enough on a CPE point of view. However, if you can answer this last question, we'd appreciate it. What sampling technique combines random and interval testing together? And is it cell, fixed interval, random, or I can't even read it, I'm sorry, on my view screen here. Apologize. The fourth one as well. I think it's portioned.
It is portioned.
Thank you. And almost everyone has voted. If there are any final questions, I know there were some questions about the timing. Do appreciate you holding on. We will conclude the poll because everyone has voted and almost everyone got it right. It is the cell technique that will combine both of those techniques together, random and interval. We'll just get over to our slide deck here. I didn't see any final questions, so I don't want to hold people up for that. We did want to note that you will be receiving 3 courses of videos, so you'll get about 6 hours of videos that will go along with the course that you get today, and that will also be in video format. So if you missed the last few minutes, feel free to come back to it. We will also have some other training events later this year in ACL and Excel. One of them, the main one, is on scripting. So that's the one that you're missing right now. But with that said, I didn't know, Jim, if you had any final thoughts.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Rich, for putting on a great webinar on getting started with ACL. I think that everybody got a lot of value out of this, and I'm sure the supplemental files will really reinforce the learning as well as the videos. So without further ado, I don't want to keep anybody any longer. I wanted to wish everybody a great day, and thank you, Rich, for the presentation. And just remind everybody that next week we have another webinar on kickstarting your Excel, and that will be using active data for Excel. And Rich will be sharing with you a number of tips on how to use Excel for data analytics. So, Rich, thank you very much, and
Thank you
all for having a great, for participating, and have a great day.